contact for this solicitation. I am going to be responsible for everything up until we write the contract. So and execute that. So you'll be passing along any questions to me through my email that was located in the RFGA document that we emailed out, and it's also posted on Oregon Buys. So if you have any questions, it's located in both of those places. Nat and Hillary are going to be presenting the program today, the assistance program, and I will let them take over. Let's see. What I would like you to do is you go ahead and ask your question, but if you are actually on a computer rather than on the phone, please type your questions into the chat, and we will be creating a question and answer sheet to be posting to Oregon Buys, so that if someone didn't get a chance to make this technical assistance session, then they'll able to get to it from Oregon Buys. And we're recording it and we'll be posting it on Oregon Buys as well. Any questions?
And apparently we're being transcribed as well, which is a new feature. I wasn't aware I was going to be transcribing as well. So we will have a full recording here, Suzanne.
So if you are calling in, just, go ahead and state your question, and this is wonderful to be transcribed. And then we'll take questions for this technical assistance meeting until end of business day tomorrow. And then we'll recover everything that I've spoken here at the end of the presentation. If the presentation doesn't take up the full time, then we just have a slide that will just announce to people that maybe didn't come in the beginning that if there's silence, it's because the presentation is over, but people can join and ask their questions while we're waiting for the time to elapse.
It looks like you have a question from Lucy Zamarelli.
Hi, everyone. My question is about Oregon Buys. I'm not actually employed by the CCO because our SOC is managed by our county. And so I don't think I have access to Oregon Buys. So does that mean that I need to have one of my CCOs forwarding me everything, or does that mean that there's some way for me to get access that I'm not familiar with?
Hey, Lucy, this is Cheryl from Pacific Source. I think I could actually answer that. So for Pacific Source, because the CCO has to be the one to apply for the grant in all of our regions, including Lane County and Deschutes County, where we delegate, the CCO Pacific Source. So Ryan Davin will be the person who's hitting send for all 4 of our CCO regions. Does that help?
Right. Well, it helps. I did know that, but my thing is that if the answers to the question and answer and contact information is on Oregon Buys and I don't have access to it, what is it that I'm missing? I have to have Ryan forwarding me everything, going in and checking himself. Yes, now I see that is nodding. Okay.
Well, I think that what is on Oregon Buys is just those 2 documents, and maybe I can
for now, yes,
that were emailed out to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct, Suzanne?
Yes.
Okay.
But I can you're going to post more right things. Now. I guess I'm worried. I'm thinking ahead to the things that you're going to post on Oregon Buys that I won't know about and won't have access to.
Lucy, this is Deanne with YCCO. Oregon Buys is larger than just OHA and the CCOs. It's where all the RFPs go. So your organization may want to register with Oregon Buys for the broader array of RFPs, et cetera, that come out. And so you can go on Oregon Buys, and you do need your organization's, I think it's TIN number. Anyway, tax ID, that kind of stuff. But it's a pretty easy registration. And then your organization has access to it for whatever comes out that may be appropriate to your organization.
Okay, thank you, Deanne.
Lucy, if you're struggling afterwards, I suggest you reach out to Suzanne and we can troubleshoot how to get you, make sure you see everything.
Thank you. Thanks, Hillary. Perfect. You can tell I have a little anxiety about this, just a little.
And I've got the expert, John Gardner's got his hand up. So John, what did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I can help in answering the question about organ buys. Anyone who is not registered can view any RFP that's posted on Organ Buys. You don't have to register to view documents. So when you get to the main screen on Organ Buys, if you search for 5325, I think is the number, in the document search bar, there might be a subcategory you need to select, but it's 5325. If you search for that opportunity will pop up, and then you can go to the attachments and look at them. You cannot bid on the document, on that RFP, but you can view, including any questions and answers. So I'm 90% sure that's true. You can verify that, but yeah, I just wanted to add that information.
Great, thank you.
The 5325 is our internal number, so I will put in the chat. I will put in the chat the Organ Buys number, and it'll also be in the presentation that Hillary will be
Great.
showing.
And I can post the number. I've got it already cut because I was just adding it, Suzanne. So give me just.
It's in.
It's in.
I got it.
So that's what you're going to look for. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and the presentation Nat and I put together. So hopefully you can all see that now. Give me 1 second to rearrange so I can still see all of you as well. So this is the System of Care regional grants. These are for this biennium. So we would love to see the money spent by June of next year, 2023. I guess that is the next year now. So this is your opportunity to ask questions. And Nat and I just want to say, all questions and everything need to go through Suzanne. So if after this presentation things come up and you're wanting to clarify, it does all have to go through Suzanne as the person from the procurement section rather than to us. So if you would be kind enough to make sure that's where you email, she'll then connect with us to get answers to things. But because this is a contract process, that is the way it has to go. And I know different things were said earlier on in this process when we believed we would be able to provide more technical assistance, but unfortunately that's not the way the world has to be because of the legality of making sure we stay straight with procurement laws. So hopefully that's not too frustrating to folks, but that puts Nat and I out of the process. So Hillary Harrison, System of Care Policy Coordinator. So I'm staff to the System of Care Council. Nat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Nat Jacobs, also with the Oregon Health Authority, help oversee the local systems of care and wraparound. I use they, them pronouns. And I also want to say a thank you to Carol Dickey for helping with some of the brainstorming that went into this PowerPoint. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Nat, and I use she, her pronouns. So the background to this solicitation is that in 2011, there was a legislative change to the System of Care Advisory Council, and it actually added more money to the council for grants. And so those grants were visualized as available for tribes and for systems of care via the coordinated care organizations. So the tribes have had a separate solicitation process happening with again, 200,000 per tribe. And then for the system of care regional councils, we've got this current process underway, which again is essentially 200,000 per regional system of care organization. And because you have no other fiscal agent, we're going to do that through the CCOs on this occasion. We have, you know, as we move forward, maybe there are other things that happen or places that it should go through, but certainly currently it makes sense that the money funnels via the CCOs. So this is generated through the System of Care Advisory Council. So there's a grants committee that met, talked through how this would all happen, develop the process. It then went to the System of Care Advisory Council, who approved the process and what we had set out as how this was all going to work. And so they are the implementing authority, and essentially I work for them. So that is who is kind of behind the curtain, so to speak. But because of the relationship and who needs to implement the work at this stage, OHA is supporting the work and putting it through the contracts process and making sure that everything happens to ensure this flows smoothly. So it is a slightly odd relationship in that you're contracting with OHA, but you're actually contracting with the System of Care Advisory Council. Everyone happy with that explanation? That kind of makes sense. So
it's a brave new world.
It is.
We're doing things that have never been done before, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Also, you said it was 2011 when that legislative work went through, but it was 2021. Just so
wishing
everyone
my life
isn't confused. A decade later. So the goals of the System of Care regional grants are fivefold. And of course, they're very much rooted in the System of Care values. So these are not going to be particularly surprising. The top of the list is ensuring that we have youth and families as partners in this work. I think everyone has felt a little bit at odds with what this looks like and what this means. So this is an opportunity to really dive into what that could look like in an expanded way for your community. And this looks like delivery of their own service. So let me just read here so I don't miss anything. It would ensure that youth and families are full partners in all aspects of the planning and delivery of their own services and in policies and procedures that govern services and supports in their community. This comes from actually a national definition of what youth and family involvement is, because Oregon doesn't have, I think, what we're aspiring to. So this comes very close to that. And then, of course, we want to ensure that services and supports for youth and families are centered in race and health equity. So increasing health equity and decreasing the disproportionality that we see for Black, Indigenous, Latin American, and LGBTQ communities in particular. They continue to be underserved. Next slide.
And I should actually point out that we wrote health equity, but we should have removed health and just left it at equity, given that this is system of care. But, you know, write often in health equity terms, but equity is what we're after across the board.
Right, both within the system of care infrastructure and in the community. So it means both of those things. The third is infrastructure, and we're going to talk about infrastructure a couple of times because it can mean many different things. We've listed them out in number 3, and then we're going to go over some definitions a couple of times after the slide. So it means a lot. It means the way that our committees are structured. It means the way that we communicate and interact with child serving systems. It means which data that we use and receive and how we make decisions with that data. Communication tools, diversity, equity, and inclusion also a part of that, staffing, consultation, training, funding again. So it's a pretty expansive bucket for expanding infrastructure. 4 is to ensure that we elevate each of the local systems of care to a higher level of implementation using the system of care values and principles. So for some communities, maybe there's not sufficient staffing to ensure that we have someone who's really informed or sort of seasoned in the way that we partner with youth and families and the way that we center system of care values and goals. And so this is to sort of level up in that way. And then 5 is to be able to make use of the qualitative and quantitative data and information to make the most informed decisions. So lots of options. These are goals that hopefully don't feel very surprising to us all.
And of course it won't advance because I want it to. There we go. So again, just to reiterate, infrastructure, we wanted to just stop on this one and say, does anyone have any questions around what would be infrastructure? Our concern in, using a word like that was the potential of it being a very narrow definition of, okay, it's just about the committees. We wanted to make sure that you understood it was a much broader definition that we were looking at in terms of defining infrastructure.
I'm going to take the next slide, Hillary. Sorry, we got a little off track there.
That's okay.
So we're going to give you some information on the pre-application. Oh, I see a hand. Let's take that. Selby.
Yeah, hi. I know that phrase infrastructure is the one that in my region we've had the most questions about. So I appreciate all of the expanded vocabulary you put there. And I'm trying in my mind to just kind of work around what that expanded vocabulary would look like in terms of what would we fund to do those things. And so that sounds like it's reminding me a little bit of what I did this past round where we tried to do that search advocate program and had all those different agencies within their own agencies engage in a training and hopefully work to implement it. So it sounds like this is, like you said, not just our committee structure with direct members, but the agencies behind them where it's open to supporting the agencies or other staff at those agencies, even if they don't come to our regular committee meeting.
I agree that I see that in the definition as well. We also have examples at the end of the PowerPoint that may also further help flesh out any questions you might have related to that.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
There's also something in the chat.
Hi, thank you. I have a question around infrastructure as well. If we funded the development or expansion of community-based peer support, would that also qualify as developing the governance structure? Because by doing that, we also increase the pool of potential youth and family members who can become involved with the governance structure.
So your question was, can we increase, was it just peer support or?
Yes, if we were to fund some community-based organizations that provide peer support and also train community members to become peer support specialists, would that qualify as meeting this definition? With the intent of that expansion leading to more involvement with the system of care governance structure.
I don't know how to answer, if I can answer the question. Suzanne, is this in the lane of something I can answer?
It sounds like it to me. John hasn't said anything, so
I just
because it's directing. I mean, you're talking about the family and the youth, so it sounds like it's in the funnel.
Great. I don't know, Hillary, what your thoughts would be. Maybe we have different thoughts, but I would say that seems a little bit outside of direct infrastructure for system of care, but I can see where it makes sense to expand your infrastructure for peers. I think I would need to, for me, I think I'm not feeling like it's ideal, but Hillary might have a very different response.
So I'll talk about what happened last time, because a number of folks did write this as the grant last time, and the committee pushed back pretty hard against that, because the CCOs do need to be, and counties need to be building these infrastructures themselves and not relying on grant funding to do that. I mean, it's part of the contract that they need to establish this and not be looking to grant money to fill this kind of position and do these kinds of pieces of work. And so the concern would be that this heads towards double dipping if you used it to develop that. So things that we did do last time were to say you could use money to support folks doing a training if they were not already employed or being about to be employed as peer support workers. So, sometimes CCOs require that you're pre-trained in order to come in. I know particularly in the adult field that was very true, that you had to be a peer and you had to have gone through a class. And so that's expensive in terms of, you stopping work to go attend a training. So we supplied money that would cover that on several of these. But what we did very clearly say was it was not money that could be used to replace what a county or a CCO would have paid to train peers or people that they had in existing employment. So it was really that the advisory council felt pretty strongly about, and we just want to make sure that that there's never a situation where this money could or should have come from somewhere else, that these grants really get used for innovation and infrastructure building.
Mm-hmm. Corinne put a really great question in the chat, so I think that's really helpful. So the Youth Advisory Council is a good example of building out system of care infrastructure, because, like to Hillary's point, there isn't existing, there's nothing in the sort of CCO contract in terms of creating youth advisory councils. So this is separate. It's different than you having funding resources to employ youth and family partners. So Corinne, that idea that's a good example of infrastructure. And sorry, Sylvia, I didn't mean to skip over you. I see your hand is up.
No, that's fine, because I know I asked a question a second ago, but I think where I'm getting tangled up, and I don't mean to get too much in the weeds on vocabulary, is when we sometimes we're kind of saying system of care infrastructure, and that calls to mind one definition for me, which then I think of the larger infrastructure in the community to support the continuum of services and supports. That's kind of my system of care infrastructure. But then when we put the word governance in there, it switches that definition entirely. That's something geared to my system of care governance infrastructure. That does feel like that's more self-directed towards the our committee structure and the agencies involved in the committee. So I think I'm flip-flopping between those two concepts a little bit as this conversation moves. So just, I guess it's written in the RFP as governance infrastructure, but just to kind of, I don't know, have the clarity on that.
And I just wanted to follow up my question with, so we did fund peer-run organizations to expand community-based peer support, and that was outside of the contract requirements of the CCOs and the counties, and it expanded it in a way that really served the families, but also led to more youth and family members being involved with our system of care governance structure. So I think if you don't allow those organizations to expand, you don't have an expansion of the pool of potential advocates to work with the system of care governance structure, and also provide that much needed support, which aligns with system of care values. And also what an effective system of care system looks like in communities. is having that peer support. And one other thing, in our survey results, the number one thing that system of care members are saying that's needed is peer support and collaborative problem solving classes and those types of services.
So I think you're right, Jennifer. What I think Nat and I heard you say was peer support workers, or, you know, again, capital letters around job title and going out and doing that piece with wraparound or whatever as in that direction. I would agree with you that the use of money to develop structures of support for parents and family, if I put it that way round, would be totally appropriate. And what we saw in your grant application was structures of support for parents and family.
Yes.
Does that make it a little bit clearer in terms of some different words so we don't get wrapped up in the peer support world?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you for this. I have to step off because I have a meeting at 9. But I'll look forward to the presentation if you'll be sharing it. Thank you.
I would just add another piece to that, which is from an equity perspective, I don't think that we can expect every parent that wants to be a part of advocacy work to be a peer delivered service provider or have some official training. So I think we also need to create a bit more of an expanded definition of what it looks like to have youth and family as partners. It doesn't mean that their full-time job is to be a youth or family partner. So I think if we create infrastructure to support youth and families to be policy partners and to be leaders, that's very different than paying for someone to be a peer delivered service provider.
So did we deal with Corinne's question?
Corinne, do you feel dealt with?
Maybe we've lost her.
It looks like Darren's got some questions in the chat. So what do you expect to see in terms of executive council approval in the application? Our executive council is formed but not chartered. We have no chair yet, for example, and meet only quarterly.
Good question. I'm not sure what you did last time, but I do think that the group needs to, by some consensus process, have said yes, that this is what you agree that you're applying with. I think we were more interested in having, in areas where there are 2 CCOs that overlap, where only one will apply, that there does need to be something from the other CCO that says they're taking that step backwards, so they're agreeing not to apply. Or actually, I think the words in the RFP are the other way around, that they support the proposal. So that's more from a CCO than from the executive council level. Hopefully that one answers that one, Dale. And the next one was also, we plan to use the grant to build a youth advisory council in collaboration with Youth Era. For lots of reasons, we've been hindered in getting both youth and family voice to the table. Yet the application asks for how youth and family participated in the development of the grant. Do we have any ideas on how that can be reflected in the application? Nat, you want to take first hit at that?
I think you can be as honest and creative as possible in explaining your current situation and making it clear how youth and family were involved in any of that decision making.
Cheryl has her hand up.
Cheryl?
Yeah, I was looking at the 5 priority areas that you shared, and our system of care region in the Columbia Gorge has a priority area for the grant that doesn't neatly fit into one of those 5 areas, but it's connected to our barrier submission form process, and it's in our system of care strategic plan. So it's very much something that the community wants to focus on, but it doesn't neatly fit in one of those 5 areas. So I guess I wanted, I feel like I can make a case for it in the grant application, but just wanted to kind of make sure that what we have cooking works for this grant.
So I believe that will fit under infrastructure, yes, under a broader definition. And if perhaps we should move on with the presentation, because I do think we directly address that in one of the forthcoming slides. So
Great.
If it's okay, I will move ahead and do that. So
Darren, did you still have a question? Your hand was up.
No, no. Thanks for the responses. It just sounds like that. I mean, I know this is a non-competitive grant, but just wanted to, I guess, just calling out some of the barriers that have existed for us for that second question I had, just being honest about that. And then for executive council approval, I mean, it just sounds like, you know, I get that we are a 2 CCO region, and that makes sense to me to get somewhat of a letter of support from the other CCO, whoever's going to apply. But it sounds like similar to that second question with the executive council approval, if we don't have that infrastructure in place to get like a formal on Jackson system of care letterhead that says our executive council approves of the application, just somehow stating in there that that consistency was reached and how it was reached with that group. Sounds like that.
yes,
I tend to be a kind of a literal person sometimes, especially with OHA, so I just wanted to try to be as clear as possible, but I understand that's still somewhat gray. But thank you.
Yeah. And given that you're establishing youth and family councils, I think we're understanding that you don't have those structures there right now. But, you know, if you've got any information from surveys that show youth and families want to be involved, need to be involved, then, you know, again, that would support that application. Nat, this one's you, I think.
Speaking of applications, so let's talk about the pre-application process, which you'll have 8 weeks to prepare for the application. And each of the System of Care Executive Council either has received or will receive. Hillary, have they already received it? Yeah. They've already received a summary of the 2019-2021 biennium grant project. So that will be helpful for folks that are maybe not part of this conversation to get a sense of what those look like. A link to the System of Care Advisory Council's current strategic plan, which has, I think, about a dozen or so specific callouts for local system of care. So those are helpful to pay attention to. And then, of course, a link to the data dashboard. So that can be really helpful in breaking down some of the numbers for different child serving systems, particularly multi-system involved youth.
So it's not a link, they were each sent a set of their data.
Okay,
so
great.
Everybody's had that presentation. And I do wonder whether the summary of the earlier grants has gone out. I know Suzanne has it now, and it will become part of the RFP process, or I can send it out to the list of people who have had everything. But it has gone out on different occasions what people have used the money for. So yeah, Lucy, I hear you. We'll make sure that does go out.
A communication also went out to the state agency partners that sit on the steering committee that reviews the local barriers. So those folks have received communication to help spread the word about these grants and invite system partners to local tables to be a part of this conversation if they haven't already. And then each System of Care Exec Council is to engage the CCO tribal liaisons in this process. And Hillary, maybe you want to say a bit more about that and how that sort of connects with the separate process that tribes are going through in order to be able to use these funds.
Yes, we did put out a tribal solicitation. We actually had only one application, so we will be relaunching that. Each tribe has this ability to request $200,000 for a project that they want to undergo that would impact system of care. So you are more than welcome to talk with them about those things and those opportunities that they have. The Coquille tribe is the only one who's applied in the first round, so we're hoping that others will get applications in when we relaunch that process. But now each CCO has a tribal liaison, and we do think it's important that you connect with your tribal liaisons and start to think about how those voices are included in your system of care process. So in terms of the funds that are available, I would need to say this is a non-competitive process. The CCOs are the pass-through to your systems of care. So I know that for many of you, you're in the process of setting up those execs. So you're not faced with that money in your own accounts because you don't have those. So the CCOs will act in that way for you. So the way we structured the funds to be available is that there's 100,000 for infrastructure, 75,000 for a project or projects, and then the opportunity of up to $25,000 if you can find something to match, which we would really recommend that you go look for either with other agencies or whatever you can find to match money. We will provide that match for that. And I just wanted to say, this could all end up being used for one item. This project doesn't have to be something completely different. If the 200,000 is something that your system of care executive decides they have to, they want to do one thing and need the money to do it well, then consider it in that way. It's not that you have to set up all sorts of different things if you don't want to. On the other hand, it may be that you have 10 things that you want to do and they structure out in that way. So that's also perfectly acceptable under the grant.
There's a hand up. Deanna.
Oh, hey, this is Deanne, YCCO. Just quick question on the match. Does in-kind match count, or is it more of a cash match?
So I believe that we would prefer a real match. But if you have an in-kind match, I think that we will be happy to consider that. It's really kind of challenge money, I think, is how do you get an even greater bang for your buck?
Thank you.
Zoe has a hand up.
So my question is about that project funds. Is there any limitation on like capital improvement, staffing? Does it have to be used in a specific way? I'll tell you, we are working on a youth drop center and we have partnered with another agency. We have the building, they're doing the remodel, and they've done a lot of fundraising to get the building remodeled, and we're looking at the building being ready in July, but then the next piece is staffing and furnishing and that piece. So that was one area that we were looking at for this 75,000 and the 25,000 match.
So I think that's a perfect investment, and okay, that is what we've done elsewhere. This time around in Eastern Oregon at the moment, Chris is using money in that kind of way. We bought washers and dryers for Coos Bay, I believe, with the last round. So that would be something that would fit. So both capital, whatever you need. I mean, my concern would be that this is grant funding. So thinking about sustainability, let's not set something up that should the conditions be different in the next biennium, that this isn't something that can be sustainable.
The program that that we would be looking at doing this drop center, they live from grant to grant. It's kind of how, you know, nonprofits operate. And so
right,
the fact that they raised $100,000 to remodel a building is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So we have Cheryl has in the chat.
Actually, I think Chris's hand was up before Cheryl's question. Sorry.
So one of the questions I have is that I cover 12 counties, and so already this is a little more complicated. But my question is, if we're looking at a 25,000 match, are you guys going to be looking at that is equally divided among all 12 counties, or is it just going to be if I get like, and I do have a group that it was like, hey, I have one county that was like, we'll match whatever you're giving our county in full. And so they've already said that. And I just wanted to make so I'm just looking for a total number of 25,000. You guys are not going to be looking at like dividing that and then having to have it by county.
Correct. And I do think this is the perfect opportunity to grow system of care, where the collaboration means that people add to the money. And, you know, I think Pamela Huntley over in Coos Bay and so on was a prime example of this being seed money that grew other money in the last round. And I think that is such a powerful message to say the community stepped up because they saw people coming in and doing this. So if you collect more than 25,000 in match, go for it. But if you only get it, then that's fine too.
Right. And I guess where the caveat to that is that the Umatilla County wants to do a drop-in center. They want to start that process, and they're big enough to do it, and make it probably self-functioning. So if they're giving double like the money, then it's going to stay in Umatilla County, growing systems of care. Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah. So there was something in the chat. Can someone read that to me?
Cheryl's says, are there more specifics about in-kind contributions? Many organizations and systems contribute staff time or other resources. How is this figured into braiding and blending community resources? And then she goes on to say, and then she goes on to say, is there a threshold for braiding and blending funding? Do we have to have a certain number of systems contributing? I think we just answered that question in.
Yes.
Cheryl, do you feel that prior question from Chris answered that?
Yeah, I think the second question is answered, but I guess could you say more about how you defined in-kind contributions?
I think I need to go research a true definition of in-kind contributions to be truly accurate. It's one of those soft things that, you know, we can all add up salary time and say, okay, we spent that much time. I think that's why I have concerns around in-kind as opposed to, you know, we really saw somebody pay for the rent while we pay for this. I think those things are more tangible. So I will do some research. If you have some specific examples, that would also be helpful for us to kind of rule in, rule out.
Thank you.
So did you have another question, or is that a residual?
I do have another question. So as I'm thinking about hiring, because one of the things that we're looking at for our use of funds is a coordinator for the governance structure, and building it out in that way with but it's been hard to hire people. Don't know if any of you've experienced that. So and I heard that, you know, ideally want the funds spent by the end of the fiscal year. So what if we have problems hiring and we can't get someone hired for 4 months? And how
end of 23. So you've got 18 months.
18
Hopefully
months,
it doesn't take that long.
Please, no. Yeah.
But who knows?
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one, and I think that's Nat.
'Tis indeed. The remaining slides, I think there's probably another 10 or so, are really going to help you with concrete examples. So hopefully this will help any other brewing questions. So we thought we'd help break it down into saying that there's going to be 3 distinct steps for navigating this process. The first one is a lot of what we've been talking about, which is where to get your inspiration from, right? And so we've talked a little bit about the system of care strategic plan. There's also community health improvement plans. Hillary's mentioned a handful of the projects that folks have implemented in the last couple years. Community engagement, whether that's formal or I think Cheryl mentioned a strategic plan that Pacific Source has got for that region. So we really want the inspiration to be rooted in the community, right? We don't want you as system of care coordinators to feel like this needs to come from you. It should be very much, of course, rooted in what the community needs. So to do that, we're going to repeat again and again the foundation that it's system of care principles that this is all going to be based on. And somehow the next slide is very jazzed up and the other one didn't get jazzed up. So step 2, develop a plan on how the system of care groups will develop consensus on the proposal. That's going to be important. And 3, develop your proposal and action plan that centers the 3 system of care values. These steps will guarantee that your proposals will be seen as equitable and rooted in system of care values. Pro tip, be sure to include several people, organizations who will share responsibility, coordination, so the project does not rely on one person.
We heard that loud and clearly from many of you this time round, so we're just putting it into the notes that you, for those of you who didn't apply, you will have heard conversation that many of the system of care coordinators have ended up carrying all of this, and it just needs to be thought through so you don't suddenly acquire a new job as well as your own. So we wanted to just highlight those past projects, and so we've talked a little bit about them. There's been a number of them that invested in youth and family connection. I think Jennifer in IHN, and then some of the Pacific Source investments and a couple of others have really looked at how do they do that and set up youth councils. I know that you have a care coordinators group, so I assume you've been sharing that information and can reach out to one another to know what you each did. Youth and family councils, again, youth councils have been created as a result of this in IHN area and in the Pacific Source areas. Parent cafes is one of the things that has been successfully invested in down in the Coos Bay area. So that was interesting work to create a different forum with a very strong health equity lens down there. And so parent cafes are things that seem to have been very helpful and then have generated energy around for system of care. OSU Search Advocates was a health equity project. The Health Share grant really focused on health equity, and so they used the opportunity to train all of the agencies in their area into how to use a health equity lens or to be more health equity orientated as you recruit and as you move people into the system. So that was something that was done. And then they also brought in health equity consultants to really help them with the process that their system of care advisory executive was using. So those are things that were parts of past projects. And so really just wanted to put those out there as things that, if they were funded last time, again, we would look at those kinds of projects again. And I will make sure there's a one-pager that I have that describes those, and that would give you that information that'll come out with the rest of the information after this presentation. So infrastructure development examples. So we had a little bit of a brainstorm and wrote down lots of ideas. None of them are, you know, given. You don't have to do any of them, but we thought you might appreciate some food for thought. So improvements and changes to the barrier solution process. Are there things that you think that you could do with some money to get more people to engage with it, to provide you with, you know, barriers or strengths for your systems of care? What is it that could be helpful in that process? I know many of you are thinking about strategic planning. So this could be money used to help you get someone to help you along the way with that strategic planning process, to help scaffold it or to do work with you around that. A couple of you already have a data dashboard for your local area. So maybe this would be a place to invest some dollars to create your data dashboard and figure out how you could collect that data and come up with something that is reportable over time. And I just put here as a reminder, we can relatively easily access service level data, but we often don't have outcome data. So what are the outcomes that your system of care executive really believes are important to your region? And then if you think about the outcome, how might you think about measuring it as you move forward? Is that recidivism within juvenile justice? Is it that, I don't know, the young people who have to access behavioral health services through juvenile justice, that number goes down because they're receiving those services before they're in juvenile justice? Who knows? But there's the opportunity for some work and some questions there. And so what do you want to measure in your local areas? So next idea was funding for someone to review policies, thinking about compassion gaps across agencies, thinking about reviewing CCO policies, agencies, thinking about how do we pay attention to health equity. You could get some consultation on just about any of the specific needs for your area, or I don't know whether it's, you know, how to cooperate better, how to get more youth and family engagement, but that would be an option. What are the local committee structures? What supports do you need in terms of training or support to those structures? That would be infrastructure. And then the wider system data information and the capacity to collect and be able to analyze that. So we've got, I think, another 2 pages of these, but other examples would be contracting with family organizations to do things, or youth organizations. I realize we've lost that word there. You could use some of this to pull in voice and organize for youth and families. So that's very much what happened with some of the Pacific Source money and contracting to do that. With my background, I'm a huge fan of family support groups, but this money could establish family support groups or youth support groups in your area that meet monthly or weekly. What I know is that those kinds of groups, with those of you who are truly struggling with youth and family voice, if you have those groups and you feed and care for those groups, however they exist, that grows voice, because you have people meeting regularly that you know, can have those conversations, and you can go meet them where they're at, which is where they're comfortable with their peers, and talk to them and get the feedback that you're looking for without necessarily pulling them into those traditional structures that we all use. So there could be parent and youth groups. The parent cafe idea is another more structured way of having those conversations and also offering training and opportunities to those folks. The last couple of things here are around communication, and we've heard a number of you talking about that need to, how do we reach out? What are the mechanisms to do that? So this could be investment in communication tools like a newsletter that helps with collaborating and recruiting, or social marketing campaigns locally to, again, be talking about system of care or elements of system of care where you feel that you need to be talking to your community about what the needs are or what the things are that are on offer that you're not seeing people connecting with, and you might expect to see, I don't know, a greater use of some specific services or connection with folks. So those are all options for infrastructure development. And my final part of this list is, you know, there are so many things that could be done with trainers or consultants around things like anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, how culturally and linguistically responsive care is developed. Again, you could think about what do you need as a system of care around being more trauma informed and pulling folks in to help support that. We know that often the religious communities have been not so enfolded into systems of care. So maybe it's some project that coordinates in connecting with religious communities or creating affinity groups for work. It's possible that this could go to staffing, and I think we already talked a lot about being careful because this is grant money, so it disappears, that this isn't supplanting money that needs to be invested by the CCO or other agencies into long-term development of the children's system, however it looks. And then it's possible that it could go into braiding and blending funding and how might that be used, and really looking to see what those examples are. I find that one a little bit more hard to wrap my mind around how to best use funding to do that. Nat, do you have anything you wanted to add on infrastructure?
Yeah, I wanted to just offer sort of a connecting of the dots. So you spoke about encouraging the development of a youth and family group so that they are a group that's already bonded and formed, and then there's a relationship and perhaps there's some requests or questions that might be run through such a group. And I would say the same is really true for any other specific group. So an LGBTQ group, a Latinx families group, Black African American families. So I think affinity groups can look a lot of different ways. And it's, you know, I think we talk about this a lot in equity work, which is we're not here to tokenize anybody, particularly youth and families and communities of color and other marginalized folks. So just wanted to offer that those can be one of the same when we look at affinity groups in that way. And I think Deschutes County has a really they've done a really nice job of creating affinity groups for their system of care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so project examples. Hopefully these are very inspirational. And I think what we tried to do here is take all of what we've heard from you over the last few years. So respite programs have always been on the top of the list in the quarterly barrier submission form. So respite programs, they can look a lot of different ways. Not everybody needs like a formal, you know, overnight long weekend respite program. It can just, what does it look like to provide breaks for parents and families? And then mentor programs for youth and for families, trauma-informed alternative activities, and then prevention work, particularly for early childhood. What does it look like to connect early with parents? What does it look like to be part of Head Start or early intervention programs in the community? And are they even part of your system of care? I know that the Early Learning Hub has a pretty robust network. And so if you're not connected with that early childhood hub, I would recommend reaching out. Maternal and child health, there's a lot of work that's being done right now through public health also. So connecting with some public health folks to see what kind of work is going on might also be really helpful as a project idea. We mentioned the CHIP, the Community Health Improvement Plan. There's also the SHIP, the State Health Improvement Plan. So there's lots of different pieces. There's a lot of projects going on right now. So surveying local community and state work for projects that you would like to expand. Peer-to-peer mentoring programs, preschool projects, these are pretty similar. We're just sort of trying to give you as many different versions of it as possible. Mental health first aid trainings. There's also a lot of suicide prevention trainings that are Most of these are free. But yeah, just short module-based trainings. Seed money for startup. This is lovely because then we can think about what it looks like to continue this work moving on. Like I think Zoe said earlier, most nonprofits are used to living from grant to grant. So what would it be like to start giving seed money, and what would it look like? I think it's sometimes easier to come to the table with some cash once something exists and people can see the impact that it has on the community. And that, you know, part of that is also equipment for new programs. I think we were talking about washers and dryers earlier. Giving supports to families who are struggling before a crisis. Funding the weekend backpack. So this is particularly for food insecure families that might need some extra help feeding their families, or just having activities over the weekend. Connecting with your local elementary schools and teachers for training opportunities. And also finding out what kids need right now. I think everybody is, I think when we put the slide deck together, Omicron we hadn't met Omicron yet. So I know that so many of us individually and our families and our communities are being really impacted by Omicron. So looking at ways that our current public health crisis is impacting and ways that projects that can support folks right now. Clothing closets, another, tangible. So I think, you know, social determinants of health. Are we dressed? Are we warm? Are we fed? And then supports for transition-aged youth. Again, I would connect with child welfare to see, you know, they also have money that they can spend right now. And so I would connect with child welfare and see what's working, what's missing, and how we can put our minds and dollars together. Scholarships for continuing ed for non-foster youth. Can't really fully remember the context for that one, Hillary. What was that?
Well, I think maybe Pamela Huntley has used some money for this, but maybe being helpful to some youth who are experiencing poverty and thinking about, do they need a grant to go take a class? That would be
right, outside of Chafee funds, and got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. I mentioned suicide prevention before. I think Cheryl, your community was focusing on suicide prevention, if I'm not mistaken. Partnerships with school-based health centers. Actually, that's one of my goals, is to better connect the school-based health centers with you all. Maybe I'll invite them to a system of care learning collaborative if that's interesting. Resources for queer youth, wellness packages for youth in foster care, hygiene kits for houseless families, infrastructure and project hybrids. So that's the affinity group and the youth councils and the family councils, which we spoke about earlier. And I think that's it for project examples. I think I saw a question or a hand. So let's just take a quick pause before we move on to health equity projects.
So I think the question we could take at the end, because it is the review process.
Super. Okay. I think you're up there, Hillary.
Oh yeah, it's me. Okay, sorry about that. Slight pause there for thought. So we wanted to just inspire you around health equity or equity projects. So what are the needs that are identified by your communities? And is there some way to intersect with this? So we just wanted to pull out the thought there are trainings, creating multicultural spaces. Are there supports that can be added to what already exists? Maybe it's collecting and sharing stories as tools for connection and awareness of those populations in your specific areas. And then the search advocates training, we're not particularly pushing that one, but just thinking about racial bias in recruitment and the retention of providers. Are there some things that you can have a useful impact on with these dollars that are part of the grant? So those are our thoughts on that. We just wanted to then remind you of the timeline today. So the closing date is the 23rd at 1 o'clock. I think to answer Cheryl's question, the System of Care Advisory Council Grants Committee will be the reviewing body for the applications. And so many of those folks have conflicts of interest. So we're being very careful to make sure we don't use folks who have that kind of conflict. And so it will be them and a number of community, other community providers and folks who are separate from CCOs, etc., who are able to sit down and read and think through these applications. So it'll probably be a group of 5 or 6 of us that will do that work. Our aim is to get the results back out by March the 9th, and allegedly we will have grant agreements out to you by April 1st. But the good news is, because these are grants, you can actually start work on these grants once we've said that they're on their way, before the release of the money, because it's a grant rather than the usual contracting process. So
I had another question. If there is a CCO, I know these are non-competitive, but if there's a CCO region that doesn't apply and there is leftover funding, what happens with that funding?
So at this stage, the contract states that that money will go back to the System of Care Advisory Council. It will not be distributed to the other grantees.
Thank you.
And the rationale for that is that the System of Care Advisory Council has a number of projects or things that now spring from the strategic plan. And so it may want to be investing money at a state level to get some of that work done. So, you know, I think we're all looking at how we best braid and blend funding. And so bringing in a consultant from outside to help the state to look at all those things may well be things that they need to invest money in. So that's why at this stage we haven't said that we would increase that money with things that are left in the pot.
Any other questions? We don't have to, you know, we have a little bit of more time. I gave a 9:45 time, but we have till 10. So if you have any more questions.
Selby.
Hi. So one question that's come up that I've gotten a lot from my members, even though we've did a little advanced preparation and had worked on identifying some project ideas, is the degree of specificity that's preferred. So for example, like, we're not going to do this per se, but you mentioned, like, you know, respite might be a larger idea, and then you decide you want to provide creative ways to support parents to get respite, but maybe you haven't. So you've kind of narrowed your idea down, but, you know, if your agency's not 100% lined up, or you don't know precisely what that's going to look like or the exact dates it's going to occur, I guess it's just that question of what level of specificity are you hoping to get when our applications come in?
As much as possible is the easy answer on that one.
That's kind of what I figured, but it doesn't reassure people much when I tell them, like, we better just have as much as we can. I keep using the term robust. We still have to have a robust proposal, but I feel like we'll have good project ideas and probably some things identified, but I could see that there, even though there could still be some implementation pieces that haven't been identified, I mean, or solidified, even though if we have the project outlined. So
yes, and I do think that what we've seen this time around is that we have revisited contracts as we've needed to. So, you know, I think that would be the same this time, that if it turns out that something can't happen for a reason, I mean, Chris is a prime example of, you know, we all thought we'd train collaborative problem solving up the yin yang, and that was most of the money, and then no one's got time to do any training of any description at this precise moment in time, and so she's ended up with quite a bit of money left, and she's had to rework the whole plan, to be honest. And, you know, unfortunately that takes a lot of time for her and for us to redo contracts. But I do think that things change in 2 years. We've just all learned that, haven't we? So just making sure that we communicate, and that's the reason that we set up the plan, that there will be affinity groups and that you will be part of that, so that again you'll be able to hopefully learn off one another what's gone well, what hasn't worked, and just to really have that staying in touch piece with us at the centre and you on the ground implementing to say, oh, this just isn't working, we need to do something different.
Any other questions? So if you have any questions after the session is over, please go ahead and email them to me. I put that in the chat here, and it is also on this slide, and we will get those posted. Let me look at my, we will get those posted questions, pros, the following day, 10 a.m. by Friday. So please get those into us by tomorrow, and we will get those posted on the answers on Friday, the questions and answers, and we will post this presentation. The additional ideas that was it Lucy was indicating, we'll have that list of additional project ideas and on Orpin, or not, excuse me, Organ Buys. So we will get that out by Friday.
They can expect to see a copy of the PowerPoint.
Yes.
The list of projects that have currently happened, the questions from today and the answers, and a copy of the recording of this.
Yes.
Okay. And I see John's got his hand up.
Hi, I was just going to suggest that the link to the recording be included in the question and answer document.
Okay.
Yeah. That's it.
Thank you.
So, Chris, it's probably fair to say it won't necessarily be sent out. You'd need to go to Oregon Buys to pick it up. But I'm sure once one of the coordinator picks it up, you'll all have it.
There's another hand up. It's John. Okay. John's hand, you're still up.
I'm done. Yeah, I can't. Let's see if I can stop it. But,
oh, that's fine. You're good.
It.
Okay. Excellent. Any other questions? We have a little bit of time. If you did you have that list handy that you can put on, share on the screen while we have a minute?
I do, of the previous projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, now I've got to find you again. Okay. Give me just a second. Oh. Okay, sorry, it didn't want to play nicely with my PowerPoint presentation. So the 2021 projects health share. Can somebody let somebody in? I can't access.
I just did.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Health share work with the OSU search advocates on diversity, equity, inclusion within the recruitment process and diversity, equity and inclusion consultation for the system of care governance. They were offering youth scholarships for Uplift youth ERA advocacy trainings, and have done some work with youth around that. Umpqua Health, infrastructure for family voice through family support. They put some money into flex funds, not flex funds for wraparound, but other projects. And across community eating disorder awareness and training. It was a very specific ask around that, that we really did look at and consider, was it an appropriate investment because it was in behavioral health. But because they've had these very specific issues in their region, we felt that it was a valid investment as a system of care to help the community address eating disorders there. Advanced health, family and youth support development with diversity, equity and inclusion focus. That's the parent cafes and some other investments there. And then they helped alternative youth activities with their service development. They also have had a plan to do some work with the health fair. And a lot of it got impacted heavily by COVID. IHN CCO used it for youth and family support and engagement in system of care governance and advocacy. So they invested in both youth and family organizations to help lift up that work to hopefully help with young people ending up involved in their governance process. In Lane County, it was all about technology to support connecting with system of care agencies and support. So hotspots, phones and things like that, because this all happened during COVID. In Klamath, similarly, expenses for technology to connect to system of care agencies. They're also looking at peer support development, again, funding those who are not currently in the business. And then EOCCO, we're going to do collaborative problem solving trainings, some work with scholarships, advocacy trainings, youth peer support development. A lot of the money has ended up redirected towards funding, supporting youth centres in 3 of the local communities, I believe, so it's been great. And then for Marion and Polk, they used some for technology to connect with system of care agencies and developed youth mentorships, a youth council, and some leadership development, primarily in for youth in their community. So those are the current projects.
Excellent. So that should give everybody some really good ideas. We will have a, in addition to the postings for today's presentation, question and answers, we will have a final deadline for questions and answer opportunities. So if you would get your questions in to me by February 7th, so that you have time between now and then doing any community engagement, and if any questions come up from that, then submit those to me by February 7th, close of business, 5 o'clock, and we will have those posted on Thursday, February 10th. So there we have it. Anything else, folks? Let's see.
Yeah, really quickly, I just wanted to say that Carol Dickey and Chrissy Oyarvides are part of the system of care technical assistants for the state. So if there are some questions, I know that Carol and Chrissy are available to connect with you all.
And for Suzanne's benefits, they do not work for OHA.
I figured. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I just have a few minutes left. If anybody comes online or has any more questions, please feel free. About 8 minutes left in the session. Unless you all agree that we're good. And we can bless you with a few more minutes to your day. You want to put your hands up for that? So we'll do, yay. All right. All right then. I think we're good. Thank you, everybody. I will be getting those things posted. I appreciate everybody's participation.
Yeah, thanks for your help today, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon. I'm going to turn off the recording now.